Marc-Alain Dutroux, French, D2, born the 6th of November 1956, is a Belgian convicted serial killer, rapist, and child molester. Dutroux was convicted in 1989 for the abduction and rape of 5 young girls, with his then-wife Michelle Martin and other accomplices. He was released on parole after 3 years in prison. In 1996, Dutroux was arrested on suspicion of having kidnapped, tortured and sexually abused 6 girls aged between 8 and 19, 4 of whom died. His widely publicized trial took place in 2004. Dutroux was convicted of all charges, along with the murder of a suspected former accomplice, and sentenced to life imprisonment. Dutroux' accomplices included Michelle Martin, Michel Lejeune, Michel Nihao, and Bernard Weinstein. Martin was convicted and sentenced as an accomplice to 30 years in prison, while Lejeune was sentenced to 25 years. Nihao was initially tried as an accomplice to the kidnappings, but was acquitted of these charges due to insufficient evidence. He was instead convicted of involvement in a gang that participated in human and drug trafficking and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Weinstein was never tried, as he was murdered by Dutroux. A number of shortcomings in the Dutroux investigation caused widespread discontent in Belgium with the country's criminal justice system, and the ensuing scandal was one of the reasons for the reorganization of Belgium's law enforcement agencies and widespread allegations of corruption and infiltration of the Belgian justice system by a criminal enterprise. In the White March, 300,000 Belgian citizens protested the mishandling of the case. Early life and early criminal career. Born in Ixelles, Belgium, on the 6th of November 1956, Dutroux was the eldest child of 5 of Victor and Janine, who were both teachers. He spent the first years of his life in the Belgian Congo. After the Congo crisis, his parents had to return to Belgium. Dutroux reported that he was repeatedly beaten by his parents. His parents divorced in 1971 and Dutroux left home. He then became a drifter and a male sex worker. Dutroux was married at age 20 and had 2 children. He admitted to beating his wife and cheating on her. They separated in the 1980s. One of his mistresses was Michelle Martin, whom he later married and had 3 more children with. Dutroux and Martin may have met when they were both in prison and married in 1989 and divorced in 2003. Early release of Dutroux after abduction and rapes. Although Dutroux had already been imprisoned in 1989 for committing similar crimes, the kidnapping and rape of young girls, he was released early. Dutroux abducted XLD on the 14th of December 1985. During her testimony, she told the police that Dutroux' accomplice Pedegum had told her that he was part of a gang led by 2 gang leaders, an Italian and a crazy stupid one. Jean Van Pedegum admitted to having taken part in the abduction. He said he had abducted XLD with Marc Dutroux and Michelle Martin. He had lived with Dutroux after being discharged from the military and having his marriage fail. Pedegum told police that his and Dutroux' first victims were 2 girls from Moreland-Wells. These 2 victims were never recovered by police. On the 7th of June 1985, the first proven abduction by the 2 took place, the abduction of 11-year-old Sylvie D. On the 17th of October 1985, the pair abducted Maria V. 19, from Péronnes-Élysées Binche. Maria V. also identified a 3rd man who took part in her abduction and appeared to be in his 50s. This man was never found by police. On the 17th of January 1986, Catherine B., aged 18, was abducted from Aix. Dutroux had 1 or 2 accomplices in her abduction who were never found by police. Pedegum was stationed as army personnel in Germany during that time and could not have assisted Dutroux. On the 18th of December 1985, Dutroux abducted Elizabeth G., 15, in Pont-à-Gravesels. Pedegum told police that Dutroux filmed Elizabeth naked and took pictures of her. At the beginning of February 1987, Martin, Dutroux and Pettigrew were arrested. This had to a large extent been the fault of Pettigrew, who had given out a lot of information about himself in conversations with the girls, which had been enough for police to identify him. The three were eventually convicted on the 26th of April 1989. Dutroux received 13.5 years. Pettigrew received 6.5 years and Martin received 5 years. Dutroux received a harsher sentence because he had also committed several robberies with Pettigrew. Dutroux was thus additionally convicted for the brutal robbery of a 58-year-old woman. The robbery was also committed with accomplices. One of the accomplices in this robbery was also never found by police. The subsequent early release of Dutroux was against the advice of the public prosecutor and the psychiatrist who had examined him in prison, who stated that Dutroux remained dangerous. His early release was granted by Melchior Wattelet, who was at that time the Belgian Minister of Justice. Granting Dutroux state assistance, sleeping pills and sedatives while in jail, Dutroux managed to convince a health professional that he was disabled because of mental illness. He thus was able to collect public assistance from the Belgian government of $1,200 a month. He furthermore convinced the professional that he needed sedatives for sleeping problems. Dutroux later went on to use those sedatives to sedate his victims. He owned 7 small houses, most of them vacant, and used 3 of them for the torture of the girls he kidnapped. Although he owned several houses, his state assistance stipend wasn't reduced. In his residence in Marcinelle, he constructed a concealed dungeon in the basement. Dutroux has been described by psychiatrists who examined him for trial as a psychopath. Crimes after release. On the 24th of June 1995, 8-year-old classmates Julie Lejeune and Melissa Russo were kidnapped after going for a walk in Grace Hollow, probably by Dutroux, and brought to his house in Marcinelle. Dutroux kept them imprisoned in the dungeon he had created, repeatedly sexually abused them and produced pornographic videos of the abuse. 2 months later, in the early hours of the 23rd of August in Ostend, Dutroux and accomplice Michel Lelièvre kidnapped and Marshall and Aoife Lamrex, 2 teenage girls from Hasselt who were on their way back to their holiday home in West End following a night out in Blankenberge. With Lejeune and Russo already in the dungeon, Lamrex and Marshall were kept in chains in a bedroom. In September, according to Martin, Lamrex and Marshall were drugged and brought to Jumet, where Dutroux and accomplice Bernard Weinstein killed them by burying them alive. Around the time of Lamrex's and Marshall's deaths, Weinstein and a man named Philippe Diver stole a van and hid it in a hangar. After it was found there by the hangar's owner, it was taken away by the police. Dutroux and Weinstein suspected that Divers and his friend Pierre Rochau had betrayed them, and on the night of the 4th of November, wishing to interrogate them about the van, Dutroux and Weinstein lured Divers and Rochau into Weinstein's home in Jumet and drugged and sequestered them, before leaving to go to Rochau's house to search for clues about the van. There they found Rochau's girlfriend, Benedict Jadot, whom they took with them back to Jumet and questioned, before leaving again to pick up another person. While they were away, Jadot escaped and alerted a neighbor, who called the police. With Weinstein wanted by police, Dutroux decided to kill him to prevent his capture. He kidnapped Weinstein and held him in the dungeon at his house in Marcinelle between 13 and the 20th of November. During this time, he let Lejeune and Russo roam freely around the house. After feeding him food laced with rohypnol, Dutroux placed hose clamps around Weinstein's testicles until Weinstein told him where his money was hidden. Dutroux then buried Weinstein alive on his Dutroux property in Sars-la-Baïsière. In December, Dutroux, having been recognized by Rochau, was arrested. According to Dutroux and Martin, Lejeune and Russo were still alive in the house at the time of Dutroux' arrest in December 1995, and Dutroux had ordered Martin to leave new food and water for the girls in the dungeon each time they ran out. Martin neglected to feed them, later claiming she was too afraid to go into the dungeon. Lejeune and Russo eventually starved to death. Deuteros initially stated that they were still alive when he returned home following his release from prison on the 20th of March 1996. According to him, Lejeune died that day, and Russo followed suit 4 days later despite his efforts to save her. During his trial, he said they were already dead when he returned from prison. An expert asserted that they would not have been able to survive the entire time Dutroux was in prison on the total amount of food and water they were said to have been given. Dutroux buried Lejeune and Russo's bodies in the garden of the house he owned in Sarlat-by-Sierre, near to that of Weinstein. On the morning of the 28th of May 1996, Dutroux and Lejeune kidnapped 12-year-old Sabine Dardenne, who was cycling to school in Tournai. In a book originally published under the title J'avais 12 ans, J'ai pris mon vélo et je suis parti grave à l'école, and published in the United Kingdom under the title I Choose to Live, Dardenne described her time in captivity in Dutroux' Marcinelle home, where she spent most of the time imprisoned in the dungeon and was starved and repeatedly raped by Dutroux. On the 9th of August, 1996, Dutroux and Lejeune kidnapped 14-year-old Laetitia Delhas as she was walking home from her local swimming pool in Bertrix. An eyewitness observed Dutroux' van, described it and was able to identify part of the license plate. On the 13th of August, Dutroux, Martin and Lejeune were arrested. An initial search of Dutroux' houses proved inconclusive, but 2 days later, Dutroux and Lejeune both made confessions. That same day, Dutroux led the police to the basement dungeon inside which Dardenne and Delhas were imprisoned. The girls were subsequently rescued. On 17 August 1996, Dutroux led police to his house in Sarlat-by-Sierre, and with his help they were able to locate and exhume the bodies of Lejeune, Russo and Weinstein. On the 3rd of September, the remains of Marshall and Lamrex were located and exhumed in Jumed. Hundreds of commercial adult pornographic videos, along with a large number of homemade sex films that Dutroux had made with Martin, were recovered from his properties. Errors during investigation. Failure to follow up on letter from Dutroux' mother warning of kidnapped girls being held at his house in 1995. Dutroux' mother wrote a letter to the authorities stating that she knew that Dutroux had kidnapped 2 girls and was keeping them at his house. Failure to rescue Lejeune and Russo. After Lejeune and Russo were kidnapped in June 1995, it took police 14 months to arrest Dutroux, although he had been a prime suspect from the start, having committed similar crimes before. During the search for Lejeune and Russo, police visited Dutroux' house, where Lejeune and Russo were held, twice, on 13 and the 19th of December, 1995. However, no attempts were made to free them, even though the locksmith who accompanied police officer René Michaud said that he had heard the screams of children coming from inside the house. The locksmith reportedly said, "I'm not leaving before we turn the place upside down. The screams are clearly coming from inside the house," to which Michaud replied, "Who is the police officer here? You or me?" Dutroux' arrest on car theft charges around the time of Effie Lamrex's and Anne Marshall's deaths. Weinstein and a man named Philippe Divers stole a van and hid it in a hangar. After it was found there by the hangar's owner, it was taken away by the police. Dutroux and Weinstein suspected that Divers and his friend Pierre Rochau had betrayed them, and on the night of the 4th of November, wishing to interrogate them about the van, Dutroux and Weinstein lured Divers and Rochau into Weinstein's home in Jumet and drugged and sequestered them, before leaving to go to Rochau's house to search for clues about the van. There they found his girlfriend Benedict Jaudat, whom they took with them back to Jumet and questioned before leaving again to pick up another person. While they were away, Jaudat escaped and alerted a neighbor, who called the police. With Weinstein wanted by police, Dutroux decided to kill him to prevent capture. He kidnapped Weinstein and held him in the dungeon at his house in Marcinelle between 13 and the 20th of November. During this time, he let Julie Lejeune and Melissa Russo roam freely around the house. After feeding him food laced with rohypnol, Dutroux placed hose clamps around Weinstein's testicles until Weinstein told him where his money was hidden. Dutroux then killed Weinstein by burying him in a hole on his Deuteros property in Sarres-la-Baissière. In December, Dutroux, having been recognized by Russo, was arrested. Marc Dutroux was arrested on 6 December 1995 on car theft charges and subsequently sentenced to 3 months in jail. During those 3 months, Lejeune and Russo died of starvation and dehydration in their dungeon cell, as the wife of Dutroux didn't feed them, despite being aware that they required her care to remain alive. Failure to review videotapes confiscated from Dutroux. During the search of the houses of Dutroux, several videotapes were found. They were never looked at. Some of them showed Dutroux constructing the dungeon in which Lejeune and Russo were held. Had police looked at it, they would have found the dungeon containing Lejeune and Russo. The videotapes had been in possession of the police since December 1995. They had been passed on to the prosecutors in the case, but not to the judges. Furthermore, some of the videotapes were returned to Dutroux by police officer René Michaud without ever being looked at. Michel Bauerlet, who was appointed lead investigator, said that some of the videotapes had disappeared and that he wanted to have them all recovered and reviewed. The videos were reportedly stolen after they were returned to Dutroux. In 1999, some of the tapes were finally reviewed. One of them showed Dutroux raping a young woman in Slovakia. The videos could have made it possible to identify other victims and also determine the severity of the torture that the victims had to endure during their ordeal. Later during the trial, the lawyer of one of the victims, Laetitia Delhas, also expressed disappointment that the videos were not reviewed, because they could have proved that Dutroux wasn't acting alone. Brief escape from prison. In 1998, Dutroux was allowed to view his case files. He was accompanied by 2 police officers. When one officer went on a break, Dutroux overpowered the other officer and was able to escape. He was captured a few hours later. The Minister of Justice, Stefan de Klerk, the Minister of the Interior, Johan van Lanot, and the police chief resigned as a result. In 2000, Dutroux received a 5-year sentence for threatening a police officer during his escape. In 2002, he received another 5-year sentence for unrelated crimes. Failure to analyze DNA from basement dungeon. Thousands of hairs were found in the cellar dungeon where Lejeune and Russo were held. However, those were not tested for DNA until 2001. Inquiry into Officer Tobias's handling of the police investigation. An inquiry began into the handling of the investigation by Officer Tobias. This inquiry monopolized resources. During the inquiry, it wasn't possible for Tobias to pass on information to the parliamentary inquiry into the handling of the case. Crucial time was lost. There were accusations that language difficulties obscured the investigation. The testimony of Regina Lauf was in Dutch, however, it was reviewed several times by the new investigators, who were primarily French-speaking. They had difficulties in understanding her, resulting in the meaning of her testimony being altered to make her sound less credible. Failure to properly investigate leads to Slovakia and Czech Republic. Several sources had said that Michel Michau and Marc Dutroux were planning a prostitution and human trafficking operation between Slovakia, the Czech Republic and Western Europe. Several other pieces of evidence pointed to connections to Slovakia and the Czech Republic. This included a videotape of Dutroux raping a child in Slovakia that police failed to review after it was seized. The car theft and smuggling operation that Dutroux was involved in pointed to those 2 Eastern European countries. At the time of his arrest, Dutroux was in possession of 2,000 SKK in cash. 6 Belgian investigators visited the Czech Republic and Slovakia in August 1996. It wasn't seen to be possible for them to prove that Dutroux had committed any crimes while there, and they returned to Belgium without any substantial evidence. accusations of cover-up. Many Belgians came to believe that Dutroux was part of a pedophile network which included high-ranking members of the Belgian establishment and that the other people involved were never prosecuted. Judge Jean-Marc Connerat's removal. Press reports claimed that, prior to his removal, Judge Jean-Marc Connerat was on the verge of publicly disclosing the names of high-level government officials who had been recognized on videotapes. Connerat had said that the businessman Michel Nihao was the brains behind the child kidnapping operation. Investigators also believed that Dutroux and Nihao were planning on a long-distance prostitution trafficking network involving cars and the import of girls from Slovakia. The investigating police said in 1996 that Dutroux was part of a child prostitution ring that may also have been responsible for several other disappearances still unsolved. They also said that the gang around Dutroux offered $5,000 per girl they received. Their criminal activities also involved car theft. It was said that the criminal network around Dutroux was involved in car theft and smuggling. The car in which Lejeune and Russo were kidnapped was never found. The general prosecutor, Anne Thilly, decided to have the car theft and smuggling be investigated by different police authorities in different parts of the country. In this way, it was nearly impossible to investigate the connection between the car theft, kidnapping and human trafficking. According to blogger Elizabeth Voss, writing in Consortium News, Dutroux also said that Nihao had proposed to traffic girls from eastern countries. Michel Lejeune, the accomplice of Marc Dutroux, said that the two girls, Lejeune and Russo, were kidnapped as an order by a third party. However, while under arrest, Lejeune stopped cooperating with the authorities. He told police that he had been threatened and couldn't risk saying any more. The father of Melissa Russo, Gino Russo, said during the White March that the removal of Judge Connerat was like spitting on the grave of Julie and Melissa. Russo subsequently said that after Connerat was removed there was no progress in the investigation. Dutroux' wealth and assets. Dutroux owned 10 houses. He was in total worth 6 million Belgian francs, $130,000. While he had all of this wealth and property, he also received public assistance of $1,200 a month. It isn't clear how Dutroux was able to acquire the 10 properties. Documents were released by WikiLeaks that showed that large sums of money in different currencies arrived in Michel Martin's bank account, linked in time to the disappearances of the abducted girls. According to Elizabeth Voss, the money was also transferred in foreign currencies from Morocco and Saudi Arabia. Both the transfers and the value of the 6 properties that Dutroux owned suggested to investigators that he was financed by a larger pedophile and prostitution ring. The Flemish newspaper Nieuwsblad reported that he had committed health insurance fund fraud, theft, insurance fraud and investments on the stock market and that these had contributed to his wealth. Other outlets suggested that he was able to acquire his wealth through criminal activity such as drug trafficking and insurance fraud. Additional sources said that he made a lot of money with car theft and pimping. Claims by the victims' families. Paul Marshall, the father of the murdered Anna Marshall, accused the police and the judicial system of a cover-up in 2001. He was angry that still in 2001 the trial hadn't started even though Dutroux had been under arrest for several years. Marshall said, "It feels like they don't want to find the truth. It is not a good feeling and not only I think this. Karen Russo and her husband Gino Russo were not permitted to identify their daughter and look at her body. They were told by authorities that Dutroux had identified her and that was enough. The autopsy of Melissa showed that she had been raped repeatedly over a prolonged period of time. No DNA evidence was taken from the body to conclusively make sure that only Dutroux had raped her. Dutroux always denied raping Melissa and Julie. Eventually several families of victims boycotted the official trial, stating that it was a circus and there had been no progress in the case since the removal of Judge Connerat. Failure to test DNA. There were countless hairs found in the dungeon where the 2 girls were held. Judge Langlois refused to have them tested for DNA evidence even though the leading police investigator, Michel Bauerlet, had begged him to have them analyzed in order to know whether more people beside Dutroux were involved. The general prosecutor of the case, Anne Thilly, said that she didn't believe there was anyone else involved and thus didn't have the samples analyzed. Thilly told investigative journalist Olenka Frankiel, "In any case, the hairs have all now been analyzed. All 5,000. And the results of this analysis? Nothing. No evidence of any relevance in the Dutroux affair. Which proves, of course, that Langlois was right all along." According to Frankiel, this wasn't true. Sources central to the investigation confirmed that, as of 2002, the hairs had still not been analyzed. Frankiel accused senior prosecutor Thilly of lying brazenly. Frankiel continued to question Thilly and asked her how she would want to prove that Dutroux raped the girls, as he was denying it and there was no DNA evidence. Thilly then replied that there were DNA tests, but that the results came back inconclusive as the bodies were too decomposed at the time the samples were taken. Dutroux's lawyer, Xavier Magne, said during the trial proceedings, "I speak not only as a lawyer, but also as a citizen and father. He was not the only devil." Out of the 6,000 hair samples that were found in the basement cellar where some of the victims were held, 25 unknown DNA profiles were discovered. There were people in that cellar that are not now accused. The prosecution never attempted to match those DNA profiles to people implicated in the case. Cult assertions. Magne also asserted that the prosecutors didn't follow up on evidence pointing to a cult called Abrasax, which allegedly performed human sacrifices. In a wooden house owned by Bernard Weinstein, a letter was found from the occult sect, Abrasax, in which a gift for Dominique Kindermans, the high priestess, was mentioned, consisting of 17 girls between the age of 2 and 24 anal, oral and vaginal sex. It was signed by priest Anubis. This priest was later identified as Francis de Smet. Later investigations show that 4 policemen in Charleroi were also members of the sect. One was even the treasurer. The headquarters of Institut Abrasax in Rue Emile van der Velde 223 for Gisela Marsh was raided in 1996 by 150 officers. Video of the raid showed police taking away bags of papers, video cassettes and a refrigerator. They also took away black magic ritual implements and human skulls. Removal of police officers. Several police officers who had worked on the case were subsequently removed from the case in 1997. They were reportedly removed because they had manipulated evidence surrounding the testimony of Regina Lauf. The involved officers always denied that accusation. This included Officer Rudy Hoskins, who believed that the testimony of witness X1, Regina Lauf, was true because her testimony matched an unsolved murder case that she could have had no knowledge of, had she not witnessed it. What she described was the murder of then 15-year-old Christine Van Hees. She said that the girl was tortured to death by the group and that Nihal took part in the torture. She said Dutroux watched. Christine Van Hees's body was found in 1984. The officer leading the investigation, Tobias, stated that they followed up on all testimonies the ex-witnesses had given, in order to determine whether what they said was possible or not, and that they came to the conclusion that it was possible that the things had occurred as the witnesses described them. As this took up a lot of resources and time of the police force, an inquiry was initiated into the handling of the case, which then again took up as many resources as the investigation of Tobias itself. It was said that the suspicion grew that Tobias and others formed part of a sect bent on destabilizing the kingdom. Tobias and large parts of his team were removed from the investigation and sent home on indefinite leave. Not only was Tobias dropped from the investigation, but he was also charged in 1997 with concealing the fact that Lauf had wrongly identified the photograph of one of the victims. However, on the videotape of her interrogation, it is visible that it was very hard for her to stand looking at the photographs and that her right answer had been in the files all along. In 1999, Tobias was exonerated from the charges. Additionally, 2 journalists from Le Soir, who were judged to have defamed him, and 4 colleagues, were ordered to pay the gendarmes 2.2 million Belgian francs, $55,000, plus costs. Even though Tobias had been exonerated, he and his colleagues remained on leave. Promotion of René Michaud, who failed to save Lejeune and Russo. An officer searched Deuteros' house while Lejeune and Russo were likely still alive on 13 and 19 December 1995. Although the locksmith who inspected the house with him suggested they should search the whole house to find out where children's screams were coming from, Michaud left after not having searched the house thoroughly. Not only did Michaud fail to rescue Lejeune and Russo, he also failed to ever look at videotapes that were confiscated from Deuteros' house. Those videotapes showed him constructing the dungeon, which would have led them to the place where Lejeune and Russo had been kept. Some of the videos also included tapes of Dutroux raping women. Many of the tapes were returned to Dutroux without ever being looked at by law enforcement. Even though Michaud committed grave failures in his duty as a police officer in what was one of the most important criminal cases in the history of Belgium, he was never removed or put on leave like other officers had been. According to Voss, he was subsequently promoted to the position of police commissioner. Arrests of law enforcement personnel believed to be connected to Dutroux. At least 7 members of law enforcement were arrested on suspicion of having ties to Marc Dutroux. One of them was Georges Zico, a police detective believed to be an associate of Dutroux. According to prosecutor Michel Bauerlet, Zico was charged with truck theft, document forgery and insurance fraud. Judge Jean-Claude Van Espen's close ties to suspect Michel Nihoul. The judge presiding over the Dutroux case, Judge Jean-Claude Van Espen, had a close relationship with Michel Nihoul. A journalist revealed that, while he was a lawyer, Van Espen had represented the wife of Nihoul. Van Espen's sister was the godmother of Nihoul's child. However, even though his close friend Michel Nihoul was involved in the case, Van Espen never resigned. He was also not removed from the case for a very long time, even though Judge Connerat had been removed simply for attending a fundraising dinner. Van Espen was furthermore the judge presiding over the murder case of Christine Van Hees from 1984. He only resigned from the Dutroux case in 1998, when Nihoul was accused of being involved in the murder and Van Espen's close ties to Nihoul were revealed. Testimony of Judge Jean-Marc Connerat in court. Connerat testified in the Dutroux case on the 4th of March 2004. He broke down in the witness box stating that there had been high-level murder plots to stop his investigation into the child sex mafia. He stated that he had to drive in bulletproof cars and had armed guards around him at all times because shadowy figures from the crime world were threatening him. The police had informed him that murder contracts had been taken out against the prosecutors in the case. He alleged that organized crime methods were used to discredit his work and make sure that the investigation would end in a judicial failure. Connerat criticized authorities for not rescuing Lejeune and Russo, even though Dutroux had been a prime suspect for 1 year before they were found dead. Connerat also said that he had received files describing a child sex network. It described seizure of children and foreign trafficking. The sum of 150,000 francs was mentioned as the price for a girl. Connerat also said that he was doubtful of the official explanation on how Lejeune and Russo died. It was said that they starved to death in the dungeon. An adult can last about 3 days without water and maximum 60 days without food. If they received nothing to drink and eat, they should have been dead very soon after Dutroux was imprisoned. However, Michel Martin insisted that they were still alive when he returned. Connerat had even written to King Albert II of Belgium in 1996, stating that his investigations into crime networks were being blocked because suspects received serious protection. The judge said that the dysfunctional judiciary was breaking down as mafia groups took secret control of the key institutions of the country. Letter of Judge Jean-Marc Conrad to King Albert II. A letter from Conrad addressed to King Albert II in 1996 stated, "This institution seems to acquire its authority and supremacy over sectors of the justice system by relying on a complex and secret modus operandi, that of the appropriation of certain key circuits of our institutions created and regulated by the law. It is a matter essentially of political, financial, police, and media circuits. This mafia-style criminal phenomenon is evidently not peculiar to Belgium, but it involves particular manifestations that are well suited to this small country. We can imagine the obstacles that a judiciary inquiry will meet when investigating such facts. Numerous taboos, problems of mentality, and a lack of cultural reference on the issue in order to be able to become aware of or deal with such criminal phenomena, taking advantage in Belgium of official reticence in terms of their acknowledgement, which favors or supports their occultation. The function of a criminal system of this sort is obviously to serve its fundamental purpose, the pursuance of particularly profitable illicit activities, such as money laundering, and to protect the legitimacy of its activities and the impunity of its agents. This indispensable function corresponds to the motive of criminal protection that assures the permanency of the incriminated system by means of the infiltration of the certain circuits of our institutions, especially the police force, a veritable knot which my whole investigation has come up against." Book by Chairman of the Parliamentary Inquiry Marc Verwilgen, the chairman of the Parliamentary Inquiry into the handling of the Dutroux case, reported attempts in a book he published in 1999 to stifle their investigation into how the case had been handled. Verwilgen eventually published a book that claimed that the Commission's findings had been muzzled by political and judicial leaders to prevent the revelation of details that would have implicated the complicity of additional perpetrators. Verwilgen claimed that senior political and legal figures refused to cooperate with the inquiry. He said magistrates and police were officially told to refuse to answer certain questions, in what he described as a characteristic smothering operation. Verwilgen blamed Langlois for refusing to hand over evidence of official protection for Dutroux. He said that if they had received that information, their report would have been without doubt more precise and detailed. Verwilgen added that for him, the Dutroux affair was a question of organized crime. Statements by Senator Anne-Marie Lejeune. The Belgian Senator Anne-Marie Lejeune commented on the case saying, "Stupidity by the police can't be the only explanation. It's a question of stupidity, incompetence and corruption. Dutroux must be a friend of somebody important, or else he was being protected because he was known to be a police informant." Lejeune said Dutroux was not a true pedophile, as he has been portrayed. He had a record of dealing in stolen cars, selling arms to hoodlums and trafficking in prostitution. When he discovered that men paid a lot more for little girls for prostitution, he started kidnapping them, she said. When Dutroux finally was arrested, police found in his house video films of him raping little girls. They said he did this so he could sell the films to pedophiles. Attempts to have access to Dutroux' dossier from WikiLeaks blocked in Belgium. In 2009, WikiLeaks published the Dutroux dossier. Belgian authorities tried to have the dossier taken down. The Prosecutor General of Liege, Cedric Vissart de Beaucarme, said, "There is some true, some false, some very disparate information here, involving some people who have done nothing wrong, who have simply been mentioned in an investigation and are thus exposed to public contempt, whereas all this material should have remained classified." Deaths of potential witnesses. More than 20 potential witnesses in the case have died in mysterious circumstances. Other deaths of people related to the case. Parliamentary investigation and escape from custody. A 17-month investigation by a parliamentary commission into the Dutroux affair produced a report in February 1998, which concluded that while Dutroux did not have accomplices in high positions in the police and justice systems, as he continued to claim, he profited from corruption, sloppiness and incompetence. Public outcry. In October 1996, more than 300,000 Belgians marched through the streets of Brussels after Judge Jean-Marc Conrad was removed from the case. He was removed for attending a fundraising dinner for the families of the victims, which the court system claimed damaged his impartiality. They demanded an investigation and reform of the police and justice system. The protest was called the White March. Conrad was beloved by the public because the only two surviving victims were rescued on his initiative, which made him a national hero. Protesters were wearing signs that said, "Stop the cover-up." To protest the prospect of a conditional release of Dutroux. A Black March was organized on the 23rd anniversary of the historic White March protest that was held in Brussels on the 20th of October 1996. The calls to take part in the march were made after it was made public that a court had approved the request of Michel Lejeune for conditional release, who was an accomplice of Dutroux and had received a 25-year sentence. The Guardian reported in 2004 that the entire credibility of the current reformist government of Guy Verhofstadt and Belgium's very reputation as a normal civilized country is on the line. Assassination of André Coulles. The assassination of André Coulles took place in 1991. The revelations in the Coulles case coincided with the revelations in the Dutroux case and in total made the Belgian public lose trust in their government. Van der Bijst was eventually convicted but had already been investigated 5 years prior as the one who ordered the contract hit on Coulles. Due to failures in the investigation, he wasn't charged. It was found that several Belgian politicians had been bribed with large sums of money by an Italian helicopter manufacturer, Augusta, in exchange for military contracts. This included Belgian Secretary General of NATO, Willy Claeys. There were allegations that both the assassination of Coulles and the case surrounding Dutroux showed that organized crime had spread in Belgium and that the institutions weren't efficient in combating the spread or corruption in organized crime. Trial. Dutroux' trial began on the 1st of March 2004, some 7.5 years after his initial arrest. It was a trial by jury and up to 450 people were called upon to testify. The trial took place in Arles, the capital of the Belgian province of Luxembourg, where the investigations had started. Dutroux was tried for the murders of N. Marshall, Yves Lamrex and Bernard Weinstein. While admitting the abductions, he denied all 3 killings, although he had earlier confessed to killing Weinstein. Dutroux was also charged with a host of other crimes: auto theft, abduction, attempted murder and attempted abduction, molestation, and 3 unrelated rapes of women from Slovakia. Martin was tried as an accomplice, as were Lejeune and Michel Nihal. To protect the accused, they were made to sit in a glass cage during the trial. In the first week of the trial, photos of Dutroux' face were not allowed to be printed in Belgian newspapers for privacy reasons. This ban remained in force until the 9th of March. Throughout the trial, Dutroux continued to insist that he was part of a Europe-wide pedophile ring with accomplices among police officers, businessmen, doctors, and even high-level Belgian politicians. In a rare move, the jury at the Assises trial publicly protested the presiding judge Stéphane Goex's handling of the debates and the victims' testimonies. On the 14th of June 2004, after 3 months of trial, the jury went into seclusion to reach their verdicts on Dutroux and the 3 other accused. Verdicts were returned on the 17th of June 2004 after 3 days of deliberation. Dutroux, Martin and Lejeune were found guilty on all charges. The jury were unable to reach a verdict on Lejeun's role. Dutroux' testimony. Dutroux claimed that he was a low dog in a powerful pedophile network. He further claimed that Michel Nihal was the organizer of their abductions. He said that he did torture and abuse all of the girls but denied killing any of them until the very end. Dutroux further denied the kidnapping, raping and murdering Julie Lejeune and Melissa Russo. He, however, admitted to incarcerating them at one of his houses. In the case of Lejeune and Russo, Dutroux also claimed that he had protected them from a power and sinister child sex ring. His testimony that he never raped Lejeune and Russo was somewhat supported by examinations of psychiatrists in 1996 stating that Dutroux didn't fit the pedophile profile. He wasn't attracted to children, but might have chosen to abduct younger victims because they were easier to manipulate and control. Dutroux admitted to abduction and rape of the other girls. He also admitted to burying his accomplice, Bernard Weinstein, alive for letting the girls die. Dutroux further said that two unidentified policemen had taken part with him in the kidnapping of Marshall and Effie Lamrex. He boasted about having built the dungeon in which Marshall and Lamrex were held for a while. He said, "I wanted to create a hiding place to spare them from being sent to a prostitution ring." Dutroux admitted to raping Lamrex. He said that Weinstein had raped Marshall. He also admitted to drugging both of them. Dutroux also admitted that he kidnapped Sabine Dardenne and raped her. He also admitted to kidnapping and raping Laetitia Delhas but not handing them over to Nihao to spare them the fate of Anne and Effie. Dutroux' lawyer, Xavier Magne, repeatedly said that the prosecution never followed up on evidence of a network surrounding Dutroux. Michel Martin's testimony. Martin testified that Dutroux and Weinstein kidnapped Lejeune and Russo. She also said that Dutroux had told her that he had murdered Weinstein. Martin further said that Dutroux and Weinstein had killed Marshall and Lamrex. She further testified that Lejeune and Russo starved to death in their basement in 1996 while Dutroux was in jail. She claims that she was too scared to descend to the basement. Martin said that Dutroux had already decided to abduct girls in 1985. He had said that it was easier to abduct and rape girls than having to start affairs with them. This way he would also have more resources and time to spend on her, so she had to help him with the abductions. The X-Files. The X-Files were testimonies of people who claimed to have been victims of Dutroux. They had been created after Judge Jean-Marc Conrad had made a public appeal for victims to come forward. In total, at least 10 victims subsequently contacted the police. All of the witnesses were given the code name, X number. One of the witnesses' names, namely X1, was revealed to be Regina Lauf. X1 said that from the age of 11-12 onwards, a family friend named Tony Van Den Bogaert took her to sex parties with the approval of her family. Several witnesses and family members of Lauf confirmed that she had a sexual relationship with Van Den Bogaert starting from at least age 12. However, Van Den Bogaert has never been interrogated, charged or convicted for sexual abuse. She claimed that other minors were present at the sex parties and that those were secretly filmed for blackmail purposes. She said, "It was highly organized. Big business. Blackmail. There was a lot of money involved." During her testimony she described some regular clients including judges, a prominent politician and one banker. She gave the police names, addresses and detailed description of 2 murders that matched unsolved cases of the 2 murders of teenage girls. Lauf said that the parties didn't only include sex but also sadism, torture and murder. She claimed that one of the organizers of the parties was a man she knew as Mitch, Jean-Michel Nihao. Lauf described him as a cruel man, who sadistically tortured girls. Lauf said that Dutroux was at that time a young man who brought drugs to the parties for the girls to numb themselves and took care of them in other ways. As a reward he was also allowed to use them for his pleasure. The crimes that Lauf described took place about 10 years prior to the arrest of Dutroux. Lauf's full name was leaked to the press. She was subsequently made out to look like a fantasist and liar. The new presiding judges declared that she was not a credible witness and that her testimony and the testimony of the other ex-witnesses would not be used during the trial. One of the other ex-witnesses, whose real name wasn't revealed, but who's now working for the police, said that they had witnessed and experienced similar abuse. They also recounted instances where children were chased through the woods with Dobermans. Witness X3 testified that one of the people present at the gatherings that involved sex orgies with minors, torture and murder was Willy Claes, Secretary General of the NATO. Claes resigned after he was found guilty of corruption in a tendering process for a large defense contract connected to Augusta Helicopters, a large military helicopter producer from Italy. The testimony of X2 implicated that Etienne Davignon, Maurice Lippens, Paul van den Boeyenens, Benoit de Bonvoisin and Prince Alexandre Saxe-Coburg-Gotha were named as having been present at orgies involving underage persons. A book was published in November 1999 titled, The X-Files, What Belgium Was Not Supposed to Know About the Deuteros Affair. It was written by two journalists from the Flemish-Belgian newspaper De Morgen, Annemie Bolt and Douglas de Koninck, and another journalist from the French-Belgian newspaper Journal du Mardi, Marie-Jeanne van Heeswijk. It claimed that the ex-witnesses were much more believable than stated by the media. But it also stated that there had been substantial efforts by the magistrates and senior police officials to demolish the testimony of the ex-witnesses. The father of a police officer that was murdered while investigating a car smuggling ring, Judge Guy Poncelet, said that the book was brilliant and convincing. He said he believed that crucial evidence had been downplayed by the authorities. Sentencing. The death penalty was abolished in Belgium in 1996. The last execution for common law crimes was in 1918. However, the majority of Belgians, at the time of the trial, would have had no problem with Dutroux receiving the death penalty. On the 22nd of June 2004, Dutroux received the maximum sentence of life imprisonment, while Martin received 30 years and Lejeune 25 years. The jury was asked to go back into seclusion to decide whether or not Nihal was an accomplice. On the 23rd of June, Dutroux lodged an appeal against his sentence. Although Nihal was acquitted of kidnapping and conspiracy charges, he was convicted on drug-related charges and was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. Nihal was released in spring 2006. He resided in Zeebrugge until his death on the 23rd of October, 2019. On the 19th of August 2012, about 2,000 people in Brussels demonstrated against Martin's possible early release from prison. She has since been paroled, 16 years into her sentence, and was released into the care of the Poor Clares in Malone. She was given shelter, although she was not part of the community. The sisters have declared that they were not her guardian, and shelter was given under the condition that she would not violate the conditions of her parole. As the convent has since been sold, she has had to find new shelter or go back to prison. A former judge has created an apartment in his converted farmhouse, where she now lives. Eli Gravieri is currently serving his prison sentence in the prison of Iter. His application for parole in 2013 was denied. He has since then been granted temporary leave, but has violated the conditions of release. He may be released if he can find an apprenticeship as a cabinet maker, which has so far been unsuccessful. The Belgian state was forced to pay Lejeune 6,000 euros. The European Court of Human Rights ruled that a moral compensation was in order because he was held in custody nearly 8 years without receiving answers to his requests. On the 4th of February 2013, Dutroux requested the court in Brussels for an early release from prison. He insisted that he was no longer dangerous and wanted to be released into house arrest with an electronic tag, ankle bracelet, placed upon him. On the 18th of February, the court denied his request. Dutroux is currently being held in solitary confinement in the prison of Nivelles. In October 2019, Dutroux won the pre-parole right to a psychiatric assessment, which was supposed to take place in May 2020 but was delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Michel Nihal was a businessman known to frequently attend sex parties. He was accused of being the brains behind the child kidnapping and abuse operation around Dutroux. According to Voss, Nihal was charged in relation to the case with kidnapping, rape, conspiracy and drug offenses. Nihal's lawyer in the case, Frederick Clement Declety, denied all charges made against Nihal by Dutroux and called him a liar and manipulator. When the investigative journalist Alenka Frankiel met Nihal in Brussels, he reportedly greeted her with the words, "I am the monster of Belgium." He told her that he was certain that he would never be prosecuted. During the encounter, he grabbed her, tickled her and pulled her onto him so that she called for her colleagues to help her get away from him. Frankiel was working on a documentary on the case for the BBC. In 2004, at the end of the Dutroux case trial, he was released of all charges of child abduction. In May 2010, the Belgian prosecutor's office dropped all charges against Nihal relating to a participation to a pedophile ring in the absence of any tangible evidence. Judges Jean-Marc Connerat, on his initiative 2 girls were rescued, was removed from case for attending fundraising dinner for families. Jacques Langlois, investigating magistrate. Dutroux' case was his first assignment. Stéphane Gau, judge presiding over verdict. Jean-Claude Van Espen, was in charge of the murder investigation of Christine Van Hees, resigned from the Dutroux case and the murder investigation around Van Hees after his close ties to Michel Nihal were made public in 1998. FX in Belgium. The Dutroux case is so infamous that more than a third of Belgians with the surname Dutroux applied to have their surname changed between 1996 and 1998. Confirmed victims of Dutroux: Sylvie D., 11, the 17th of October 1985, abducted and raped Maria V., 19, the 17th of October 1985, abducted and raped Catherine B., 18, 17th 1986, abducted and raped Elizabeth G., 15, the 18th of December 1985, abducted, raped. Dutroux took videos and pictures of her ex LD, the 14th of December 1985, abducted and raped Melissa Russo, 8, the 24th of June 1995, abducted and imprisoned, died of starvation and dehydration, found in Sars-la-Baïsière. Julie Lejeune, 8, the 24th of June 1995, abducted and imprisoned, died of starvation and dehydration, found in Sars-la-Baïsière. And Marshall, 17, the 23rd of August 1995, abducted, imprisoned and raped, buried alive after being wrapped in plastic, found August 1996. Yves Lanrex, 19, the 23rd of August 1995, abducted, imprisoned and raped, buried alive after being wrapped in plastic, found August 1996. Sabine Dardenne, 12, the 28th of May 1996, abducted, chained by neck for 79 days and raped repeatedly, according to Vasiletitia Delhas, 14, the 9th of August 1996, abducted, chained to bed and raped for 4 days. Dutroux houses. Marc Dutroux owned 7 houses, 4 of which he used for his kidnappings. The house on the route to Philippeville 128 in Marcinelle is most often cited in the media. All victims were held captive here in the basement and bedroom. The municipality of Charleroi seized ownership of this house because of what happened there and the bad state of the house. There are plans to create an open space with a memorial site here. In the Belgian procedure of compulsory purchase, an owner has a last right to visit the house. Therefore, Dutroux visited this house on the 10th of September 2009, under heavy police guard. A house in Jumet, that has since been demolished. The remains of Anne Marshall and Yves Lanrex were found buried in the garden of this house. Bernard Weinstein lived in this house for a while. A small monument is placed at this location. A house in Marche-en-Opont. Julie Lejeune and Melissa Russo were held captive here for a short while after their kidnapping. A house in Sars-la-Baïsière. The bodies of Lejeune, Russo and Weinstein were found buried in the garden. The house was bought by the municipality of Lobs in the first months of 2009. It is planned to make a park with a monument commemorating Dutroux victims here. Chronology of the case. Previous crimes. The 26th of April 1989, Marc Dutroux is convicted of the rape of 5 girls in 1985 and 1986. The 8th of April 1992, Deuteros, thanks to the then Minister of Justice Melchior Wathalit, is released from prison early where he was serving a 13.5-year sentence. Main crimes and arrests. The 24th of June 1995, the 8-year-old girls Julie Lejeune and Melissa Russo are abducted in Liège. The 22nd of August 1995, the 17-year-old Anne Marshall and the 19-year-old Effie Lamrex are kidnapped in Ostend. The 25th of November 1995, the 43-year-old Bernard Weinstein was killed by Dutroux, presumably on this date. The 13th of December 1995, following tips from witnesses and Dutroux' mother, Chief Guard René Michaud searches Dutroux' house in Marcinelle. Children's voices are heard, but Michaud thinks that they come from outside. The 28th of May 1996, 12-year-old Sabine Dardenne is abducted in Caen, Walloon. The 9th of August 1996, Laetitia Delhas, 14, is abducted in Bertrix. The 13th of August 1996, Dutroux, his wife Michelle Martin, and a friend, Michel Lelièvre, are arrested on the basis of witness statements. The 15th of August 1996, police discovered Sabine Dardenne and Laetitia Delhas, who were hidden in a cell in the basement of Dutroux' house. The 16th of August 1996, police arrest Michel Nihau on suspicion of conspiracy. The 17th of August 1996, the bodies of Lejeune and Russo are dug up in the garden of a house that Dutroux owns in Sars-la-Baïsière. The girls died of starvation. The corpse of Bernard Weinstein, a French companion of Dutroux, is also discovered in the same garden. The 18th of August 1996, Dutroux and Lelièvre confess the kidnapping of Marshall and Lamrex, but deny that the teenagers were murdered. The 3rd of September 1996, the police find the bodies of Marshall and Lamrex under a shed at Weinstein's house. They are buried alive. Investigation. The 21st of September 1996, Jean-Marc Connerat, investigating judge in the Dutroux case, marries his girlfriend with whom he has been together for 10 years. Together with their son they visit a benefit meeting for the parents of the disappeared children. They eat spaghetti during this benefit meeting. Connerat sat at the table with Michel Bauerlet, the attorney at Neuf-Château. He only stayed for an hour and did not speak to Sabine Dardenne. The magistrates received a fountain pen of €27 each, their wives a bouquet of flowers. The 15th of October 1996, the spaghetti affair. The Court of Cassation removes the investigating judge Jean-Marc Connerat because attending this benefit meeting where he received 2 gifts, the plate of spaghetti and a fountain pen. The 20th of October 1996, the White March. Around 300,000 people demonstrate in Brussels to vent their outrage at the delays and errors in the Dutroux investigation. The 24th of October 1996, fearing that the Dutroux investigation will be screwed up, the Belgian Parliament will set up an independent investigation committee to investigate the Dutroux case, as well as the possible procedural errors in the Belgian police and judicial authorities. Mark Verwilgen will be the chairman. The 15th of March 1997, the Dutroux Commission makes scathing criticism of the police and the Ministry of Justice, who made a mess of investigations into the missing girls. The 6th of May 1997, the Dutroux Commission returns to work and investigates whether Dutroux was protected by high figures. The 15th of February 1998, the committee's second report states that the Dutroux gang did not enjoy protection from above, but benefited from corruption, carelessness, and lack of professionalism. The 23rd of April 1998, Dutroux escapes his guards in the Neuf-Château courthouse, but is picked up again 4 hours later in Herbeumont Saint-Médard by Ranger Stéphane Michaud. Interior Minister Johan van Lennot and Minister of Justice Stefan de Klerk offer their resignation on the same day and are succeeded by Louis Tabak and Tony van Parijs, respectively. The head of the government service, Willy de Ritter, also resigns. The 14th of July 1999, Hubert Massa, Advocate General in charge of the Dutroux case, commits suicide. The 15th of December 1999, Michel Nihal is released conditionally due to lack of evidence. The 15th of March 2002, investigative judge Jacques Langlois completes the investigation into Dutroux. The 17th of January 2003, the council chamber in Neufchâteau decides to bring Dutroux, Martin and Lelièvre before the court of Assassination. Nihal is excluded from prosecution. Public prosecutor Bauerlet and some civil parties file an appeal. The 30th of April 2003, the Liege Chamber of Indictment (AI) follows attorney Bauerlet and also refers Nihal to the court of Assassination. The 8th of December 2003, attorney Bauerlet files the 27-page indictment. Trial the 1st of March 2004, the Dutroux trial starts in Arlon. The 14th of June 2004, after 56 litigation days, the 12 members of the jury withdraw to consider the guilt or innocence of the suspects. The 17th of June 2004, Dutroux is found guilty of various murders. The 22nd of June 2004, Dutroux is sentenced to life imprisonment and 10 years at the government's disposal. Michel Martin gets 30 years in prison, Michel Lelièvre 25 years and Michel Nihal 5 years. Dutroux appeals in cassation. The 16th of December 2004, the Court of Cassation decides that no procedural errors have been made. The penalties continue to apply. October 2005, Lelièvre asks for a first time to be released conditionally. That is refused because he has not yet reimbursed his victims. Michel Nihal was released early in May 2006 under conditions. 2007, the Belgian state is ordered by the European Court of Human Rights to pay €6,000 in damages to Lelièvre because his pre-trial detention had lasted unreasonably long. Like Marc Dutroux and Michel Martin, Lelièvre had been in jail for almost 8 years when he was convicted in 2004. The money goes to his victims. April 2007, Michel Martin submits a request for conditional release in application of the Lejeune Act. This is rejected in view of the seriousness of the facts, the lack of probation prospects and the risks associated with the psychological profile of the convicted person. October 2008, Martin submits a second application, which is rejected. November 2009, Martin submits a third application, which is again rejected. The 8th of May 2011, Martin, after serving half of her sentence, obtains conditional release. The associated conditions were not met in mid-June 2011, and Martin was not released conditionally. April 2012, Dutroux requests penal leave, allowing him to stay outside the prison for a day and a night every month. This can be done at the earliest 1 year before serving 1/3 of his sentence. The prison management rejects. Releases the 31st of July 2012, the criminal court decides once again to release Michel Martin conditionally. The monastery of the Poor Clarin in Malone is prepared to receive her. However, the Public Prosecution Service appeals in cassation. The conditional release leads to protests. The 19th of August 2012, the families of Julie Lejeune and Anne Marshall, together with Laetitia Delhas, are organizing a demonstration against Martin's conditional release. There are 5,000 participants. After the event, they will be received by Minister of Justice Annemie Turtelboom and Minister of Internal Affairs Joël Milquet, a week later by Prime Minister Elodie Russo. The 28th of August 2012, the Supreme Court ruled that it had found no procedural errors in the decision of the criminal court. A few hours later Martin leaves the prison on the way to the monastery in Malone. The 6th of September 2012, following the protests against the release of Martin, the government summit finalizes the coalition agreement that included a tightening of the conditional release. The 13th of September 2012, Dutroux applies for release with ankle strap. This can be done 6 months before the first appearance before the criminal court. According to Ronnie Bodwin, Dutroux's lawyer, he also strongly desires to be released. He declares to have spent hours discussing repentance and regret with him, which Dutroux does not have. He finds it regrettable that people have died, but he does not feel guilty. As a psychopath, he cannot empathize with what he does to others, he only sees what he is entitled to. April 2013, Dutroux will have served 1/3 of his sentence and will be summoned for the first time by the enforcement court, even if he does not take the initiative with a request for a conditional release. October 2019, Michael Lejeune released under conditions. October 2019, Dutroux filed to have himself be examined by psychiatrist. In order to be able to be released early under conditions in 2021, 3 psychiatrists would have to come to the conclusion that the danger of him reoffending is low. In May 2020, Dutroux's pre-parole hearing was delayed by the COVID-19 pandemic. See also Jean Dennis Lejeune Karen Russo Alcazar Girls List of Prison Escapes List of Serial Killers by Country Moors Murders Saxon Death of Caprianta Kuiper Regina Lauv. References Inline citations General references The official indictment BBC News on Sabine Darden Dutroux at Crime Library United Nations High Commission on Human Rights report criticizing changes in the Belgian constitution due to the case. External links Media related to Marc Dutroux at Wikimedia Commons.